Corey Scott, Senior Director of House Security at LinkedIn, responsible for the information security team at LinkedIn, including things like application security, penetration testing, security monitoring, and incident response. And I'm joined here on stage by David Sintz, who is our staff ecosystem security program manager, and he's responsible for a good chunk of our security program that includes the bug bounty program and some of our application incident response programs. So just a little bit about us, some of our pictures, and a little bit about our likes and dislikes. So, but what I do is I want to kind of share with you some of our inspiration for our talk today. And about a year ago, our CEO, Jeff Weiner, gave a publishing post regarding what types of things that makes you want to work with somebody. And it includes, for example, people who really dream big, that have great ideas that are inspirational to you as you go out and do your work. The second is a group of people who really get stuff done. They can execute with precision, and they'll be there when you ask them to be there. And then finally, there's people who simply just know how to have fun, because you're spending so much of your personal and professional life with your coworkers that you actually want to have fun with them as well. And so if you find the intersection of these three groups into one set of people, and those are the people that you most enjoy working with, it really is a special place for you when you're working with those groups. And I thought this actually also applies to security teams. When you look at the concept of the security teams and the face that you put to other parts of the organization, you want to be known as a group that dreams big, that talks about many of the things like that Dino presented earlier in his keynote about thinking about security differently and coming up with new big ideas. The second is that you want a team that really can get stuff done, that executes well, and will be there when you need them. And then also a team that doesn't take themselves too seriously and knows how to have fun. And I'd like to say that, at least for the dreaming big side of things, I think we have that down. We are optimists at our heart. We try to secure the unsecurable. And if you go out on the vendor floor over there, you see a lot of dreaming going on there too. But on the side of knowing how to have fun, if you look at our security culture and the Twitter love fest and the parties and all the things that we do when we get together, I think we can say that we also have fun. But it's the getting stuff done that's a little challenging for me to say we do well. And it isn't necessarily saying that we need to work harder or put in more hours than we already are today, but I don't think we're executing as well as we can, and it comes down to tactics. And so what we're going to do today is present some of the elements of our security program that we like to say represent a tactical security program. And it differs from, for example, a more strategic approach where you put out and outlay like 1 year or 3 year plans. Instead, focuses on getting stuff done in a very short order. And then we'll give you some examples through our application assessment program and our application incident response program, and then finally talk about how we approach bug bounties through this tactical approach. So what are the aspects of some of the concepts around tactical application security programs? The first is that they're lightweight and iterative. So let's use the example of an API review. So when I first joined LinkedIn, we were opening up a large amount of our platform for external API consumption. And I was a one-man shop when I first joined, and so there was very little I could do in depth. So what I did is when we started reviewing those endpoints, the first thing is I simply just cataloged the request so that I knew exactly what the API endpoints were that we were exposing to the public. And I asked 3 questions. I asked, is this exposing member data? Is it encrypted? And is it authenticated? Just really simple questions about how that API worked, and gave very canned advice about what types of steps that they should take to secure those APIs. But then I iterated the process. And then in the second version, when I had more staff and more time to breathe, I added some capability. In this case, I added some conditionals about, well, if you're handling member data, then we need to take a look at your deeper design. Let's look and do some data flow diagrams. Let's do some architecture review and get deeper in. And then third, I iterated even further and also introduced technology to help solve the problem through an automated scan to find vulnerabilities. Now, if you would ask the service owners, to them, the entry point never changed. They came, they asked us for advice, we cataloged the request. But just like if you went to like a up and starting restaurant, you might see that their menu starts really small with just a couple things that they do very well. And then as they mature, the selection of choices grows larger and larger, and hopefully better and better. So the aspect of a tactical security program also includes the ability to demonstrably reduce risk with each action taken. No long-term plans where we'll be secure 3 years or 2 months down the road, but now. And we do this in how we evaluate our own team, as well as our own sprints. So we at LinkedIn work with an agile methodology, and so every 2 weeks we have a new sprint plan with a set of tasks that we have allocated for the security team. And we ask ourselves for each of those tasks these 3 questions. Does it stop something bad from happening in the future? Second, does it let us know about something bad happening that we didn't know about already? Or third, does it actually put us on a clear line path to stopping an existing bad thing from happening anymore? So very clear. Every task is evaluated against these 3 questions. And if the answer is no to all 3 of them, we don't do it. So that allows us to demonstrably reduce risk with everything that we're doing. So someone could just go up to you and say, these are my sprint tasks, and you can show exactly what the value is to the business. The third is that we drive operational excellence before we go into the concept of authority. And the way that we do that is by measuring. So for example, at LinkedIn, we measure the number of assessments that we complete every quarter, and we break it down into the different types of assessments that we perform, whether they be focused on infrastructure or member-facing applications, how many bugs that we found, and most importantly, how many assessments did we complete before the actual application went live. Then we look at the ecosystem of the security systems themselves. So we look at how many production impacting bugs did we find, and was it us who had found them or someone external to the organization? And when we have critical bugs that impact our members, what was the response time to get those things closed? So one of the things that I always like to say regarding a tactical program is that every day that you are in the role of a security staff and you don't have someone else executing part of your vision is a day lost. So when I joined LinkedIn, I found that there was some deficiencies in how we were maintaining our internal corporate security. And people have been talking for a while about like these long-term plans, about hardening different parts of the infrastructure, and that would happen next quarter or once we got budget the following year, and that wasn't acceptable. Instead, what we did was we declared a code yellow. And a code yellow at LinkedIn means that everyone is working on a problem until it's complete. And so the way that we did that was we added small amounts of incremental improvements, adding logging here, adding monitoring on this component, introducing 2FA to one set of applications. And we gave each team a small, consistent amount of work, whether it be IT, networking, systems, groups, and then we had prioritization discussions at the end of each of those sprints to have clear decisions about the timing of when those things would happen. So one of the things about being a tactical program is you make other people move rather than waiting for your grand vision or waiting for budget or trying to provide some additional timeline. So that brings us to a point about authority or buy-in into your program. And so my perspective is that we really want to operate more like a consultancy. I come from a consulting background. I was at Stake and Monsanto prior to joining LinkedIn. And so I advise my clients on how best to secure their environment with a fundamental trust that they wanted to do the same. And then we only hold our governance mission, the kind of the hammer about being the lead security guy, in your back pocket. In other words, you keep it relatively well concealed. So then you ask yourself the question, how much buy-in do you actually need as a security person? I've found that you have three different groups of people that you will work with. The first group is the supporters, and they're the people that you actually go to work to make happy every day, because they buy into the security mission, they believe in what you're doing, and by executing tactically and have strong expertise, you're a good consultant, you'll get their support, and you'll continue to move more people into the supporting camp. The second group of people that you'll encounter are what you would call followers. These are people who believe that security is a necessary evil. It's something that they have to do, but they want you to get out of their way as fast as possible. And if you operate from a tactical perspective, where you're executing a good set of assessments, they know what you're going to do, and they understand the processes, you'll be able to get their buy-in. The third group is people who will be resistant, and those folks will always be resistant no matter what you say. And so those folks may not believe in your threat model. They may not believe that in the security mission. And for there, you have to take away their arguments. You need to be able to deliver when you say you're going to deliver. You're going to need to show that you're not introducing friction into the organization, and that your risk decisions are well thought out so that you take away many of their core arguments. So, with those elements of a tactical security program outlined, we'll give you some even deeper examples in our application assessment program. So here is a nice pie chart that shows a bit of a breakdown of the number of assessments that we performed at LinkedIn in the last year. It's over 440 assessments. And as you can see, the majority of them are actually penetration tests. And that's an aspect of the fact that we're releasing code 3 times a day, every day. And so oftentimes what we find is doing that type of dynamic testing near the end of the development lifecycle gives us the best coverage. And so you can also see that we do a lot of cloud assessments. These are evaluations of third-party vendors that handle our member or corporate data. And so we do this with a team of 6 people. This is over 400 and some assessments. And so the way that we're able to achieve such volume and such coverage is by recognizing that application assessments have a flow. The first concept is that you have the idea of intake that moves to execution and then moves to the deliverable of the assessment. And on the concept of intake, you first have to recognize that there's 2 types of demand. There's internal demand, where you have your own team scouting out, trying to find pockets of risk and try to remediate them. This server is not properly hardened. This application is not properly protecting member data. And go and drive assessments that dig deep into that. The second type of demand is external demand. That's where people come to you and ask for advice. It's great if they're doing it because they consider you a subject matter expert. It's okay if they're doing it because policy or procedure tells them to do so. But what you recognize during your intake process is that you don't want to be too heavily weighted towards one side or the other. If you're all about internal demand, then you get perceived as an inquisitor, just trying to go out there and find all the badness. But on the other side, if you go and are focused exclusively on external demand, then you get to be like a service bureau, where you're simply handling demand without looking at the bigger picture. Then, once you move from intake into execution, then you want to put in 2 almost what seem to be diametrically opposed concepts. The first is to have a set of reusable methodology, so that when you do an application penetration test, when you do a code review, when you do a design review, all of those methodologies well documented and people understand how you're executing it. But then you actually want to take that methodology and build custom test plans. So the idea is you want to come up with game overs or other types of really negative security outcomes for the things that you're assessing and document those, leveraging the reusable methodology. Then finally, you take a look at the deliverables that you produce. Now, in the case of, for example, penetration testing, it's very easy. It results in bugs that need to be fixed. In the case of design reviews and other aspects, they result in requirements. But everyone understands exactly how this process starts and ends. and so that you're able to execute very quickly. So there's some core tactical assessment principles that we undertake. The first is that we need to be easy to find and very quick to engage. And so we do this primarily through the concept of what we call office hours, and we'll have a deeper dive into that on the next slide. The second is that we need to be flexible on documentation and preparation. When you're performing assessments, you don't want to hand over a 4-page or 5-page questionnaire for the application team to always fill out before you'll even get started. Instead, we'll come to them, and we'll document things on the whiteboard, help them draw diagrams, and we actually see oftentimes our documentation that we prepare for the reviews being used in their documentation to other stakeholders, and that feels good. The third is that you have to have give clear guidance that actually has a reasonable likelihood of being executed. Nothing's more deflating to an application team to give them a requirement that they cannot execute. In other words, that there's too much dependency on another team, the technology isn't available, it subverts their core business model. All those things are just buzzkills for assessment. The fourth is that you need to be able to jointly engage with other teams, because one of the things that you'll find when you do lots of assessments is those teams will also need to go and meet with legal to get approval on what they're doing. They might need to meet with the customer support team. They might also need to talk to other engineering organizations. What we do is we provide a one-stop shop and provide that assessment with the context by bringing those other stakeholders in the room at the same time. So like if, for example, we say, well, you need to store the data in a particularly hardened database that is owned by another team, we'll bring that team with us during the assessment, so they don't need to go out and find all the people that they need to. Finally, you need to be passionate yet practical. It's going and meeting with a security team should never feel like you're being judged or someone is pronouncing whether or not you're secure or not. So it should not feel like punishment. So let's talk about office hours. So twice a week at LinkedIn, we have as well as doing things on demand when the schedules don't line up, we have the concept of office hours. And for most of these sessions, they're 30-minute sessions, and you just sign up for them on a Google Doc. And that actually ends up being the statement of record. So you have things like all the decisions made in that meeting, links to other review tickets, links to standards or documentation. And the house security team, as well as trust and safety, which is our internal team that focuses on customer support for security-related issues, as well as product legal, will meet all at the same time and go through a brief presentation with the requester, and then we document the security requirements as we go. So this is a concept of like triaging the potential application to determine what additional things they're going to need to do. For example, you may find that they need to do a pen test and a code review, or simply they just need to do a design review and then they're good to go. And we document those requirements as we go. So each month we do over 30 product consultations, 25 general security sessions, and 4 corporate IT speed rounds. And none of those actually count even in the 400 number of assessments that we do. So our tactics for that involve building a service catalog. So we have documented approaches for how we do these 5 items, everything from threat modeling to reviewing vendors at LinkedIn. And we document that methodology so people know what to expect. So that brings that consistency that's so important. But then we also scope those tests to make sure that we're only focusing on the things that are actually most important to the security objectives of the review in the first place. If we don't care about how the data is stored because it only is in transit for a very small period of time, then we maybe would not do that section of the review. And so we create those test plans so people know exactly how they're being assessed. So when I was able to get the necessary executive buy-in to review every product that LinkedIn shipped about a few months into my time there, I thought, this is awesome. I've got what I finally wanted, the ability to see every product. Then I realized, this is a little more difficult than I thought. The concept of when does a product launch? What kind of review do you actually need? And how do you know when you're done, when you're shipping code and iterating on features on what we call 3x3, which is shipping 3 times a day, means that you probably feel like you're never quite done. And so what we did was we simply owned it. And we said, look, for us, review means a new feature that actually impacts member data or changes an access control model. And then from there, we went and said, for newly products that are rapidly iterating, that are coming up with new features, what we do is we end up sitting in their own sprint planning meetings, so that when we see new features being discussed and put on their own application timeline, we give them guidance right off the bat about which things will need further security diligence and which things they can just go ahead and continue to develop without additional security review. That way, by using a combination of embedding talent as well as determining what things need reviewed at particular times, will allow them to rapidly develop. And so one of the things that we talked about so far has kind of been that external demand. People saying that they need a review, and so you go and you provide these services to them. But there's also the concept of internal assessment. And so there's a product launch flow at LinkedIn, and just like any of your organization for IT projects or the like, where you try to actually insert yourself into the business decision points where projects are approved. And we look for opportunities not only to just say, oh, we need to review that, we need to review that, we can pass on that. We also say, how can we help? So, for example, if you're releasing a feature that customers might have security questions about, say, let me help you with a white paper there. Let me help you with a product marketing message around how to make sure that people feel that this component of the application is secure. Do you need a third party to come in and assess that? Would that help you with sales to certain sets of customer base? And then it looks like this feature could be abused. How about we help you build an abuse model so that you can actually detect it being abused when it happens? And we also, of course, then look for changes in our staging and production environments. If we see a new feature showing up in our staging environment that we haven't had a review on, then we might go and knock on the door and say, hello, we see that this is something that you're working on. Would you like to come and get it reviewed? And the way that we do that is we actually befriend our gatekeepers in other parts of the operations organization. We look for when new domains are registered, when DNS changes, and changes to our front-end routing for traffic to our website. So we know very quickly when new features and functionality are coming in. So this is all about generating some of that internal demand that we talked about. That being said, there are pitfalls. When you actually are successful in getting a large amount of assessment intake flow, you'll find oftentimes that there are assessments that may be unwanted or uninteresting. And for those, you leverage your office hours to quickly and ruthlessly cut those out. So you have them come, you present, and even though the policy or procedure may say, yes, this needs to be reviewed at this level of depth, if you can just ask a certain set of questions, you can actually close the review right then and there. Additionally, a lot of people will often ask, wow, it sounds like, you have a pretty well-established process. Can I just simply do it myself? Can I do and execute your own methodologies and self-certify? And I would warn against doing that, because oftentimes there's a certain set of interdependencies where you have one application team that's building a component that another team relies on for the security of the system as a whole. So you never will get to see that if people are self-certifying all their applications and operating in silos. So that also comes to the point of one of the challenges of trying to run your program just as a consultancy, and that's missing the big picture. When I was an external consultant, the major thing that I focused on was making sure that my clients were satisfied. That was it. As long as they were happy at the end of the day and I delivered what I promised, I was in good shape. But when you run an internal security program, you have many more stakeholders. And you, of course, need to keep your developers and your business owners satisfied, but you also need to consider the overarching company governance and the security of the organization as a whole. And also realize that the decisions you make set precedent. One of the fun things about being a consultant is you can bungee in and give some advice, and it doesn't really matter if it impacts the rest of the organization moving forward about future decisions. But when you make a pronouncement about a given risk or impact for a given project as an internal stakeholder, that will set precedent. And then finally, and most importantly, you always need to consider the safety and security of your members and your customers first and foremost, even more than above the business objectives or the overarching company governance. So, when you have a strong application assessment program and do it well, hardly anyone notices this. But when you have a critical security vulnerability, all eyes are suddenly upon you. And so I want to talk a little bit about our application incident response. So in 2015, we had 77 critical bugs that were handled at LinkedIn. 21 of those were externally discovered, while 56 of them were discovered internally. A lot of that had to do with that concept of internal demand, encouraging our team and actually stakeholders even outside of the security team to go out and find security vulnerabilities in our own products. Now, we've been told that our definition of critical is a little bit more aggressive than the industry baseline. And I'm okay with that, because part of that is being tactical, is figuring out how to quickly resolve and remediate those. And also, I'd like to say that the vast majority of these bugs were closed without any member impact. And so with that, I'm going to turn it over to David to give us some case studies.
All right. Thank you, Corey. All right. So before we get into the fun stuff, I should probably provide a little bit of background on how we handle incoming reports from the outside world. Like many companies, we receive reports on a fairly regular basis. Most of them to our security email alias, which is security@linkedin.com, of course, but they also get passed to us through customer service tickets, social media, and of course, executive escalations. Now, to handle with all the incoming reports that we have coming in, we have an on-call, which is one of our pen testers. That's the assessment team that Corey was talking about earlier, who does our pen test, cloud review, so on. And the main goal of this individual on call is to quickly triage or handle any incoming bug within the normal business day in about 4 hours. Pretty tight SLA. Now, during the nights and weekends, we adjust the SLA accordingly to 8 hours. And then only criticals are followed up on the nights and weekends, which will help reduce our on-call burnout. Now, some may question having a seasoned pen tester triaging incoming bugs. We actually view this as a necessity. Having someone who is already familiar with the products, existing issues, and architecture problems can quickly triage and handle any incoming bug. Now, it's important that every single one of these reports also gets reviewed within our short SLA. Like I said, we want to respond to the researcher in a very short period of time, even if it's just an acknowledgement that we had received the report and are still investigating. So the other thing we want to do here is we want to make sure that when we do have a critical, we shift the focus to our ecosystem team, which I'm a part of, who then takes over responsibility for handling and coordinating the issue. All right, so now kind of the boring stuff out of the way, let me show you a real case study that happened. We call this changing faces. We received a report, of course, on a Friday at 5 p.m. That the reporter could change any profile picture for any member across the entire site. Unfortunately, with surprising regularity, the reporter to us was not the original discoverer of the bug, and we quickly found the original bug source as a YouTube video already posted online. So let's go through it and I'll show you how this was done. So first, we're going to find a profile that we wanted to face. I'm going to pick Corey's here. Might as well. He's the boss. Let's have fun. So to do this, we're going to go ahead, there's that little down arrow next to send message. We're going to click block a report. Now I'm going to go ahead and select the picture as inappropriate. Now here's the really technical part. I'm going to take my mouse, I'm going to put it over that continue button and click it. Yep, that was it. So it was a pretty bad bug. Obviously, there was no technical need whatsoever. You simply just click through and it was a bad mistake. So obviously, if I want to have a little bit more fun with this particular bug, I go change my profile picture, I follow the same steps, and the cat is now Corey. Okay? So now to be clear, the lawyers wanted me to point this out. This is fixed, so please do not go clicking on your friends' profiles expecting their pictures to change. It's not going to happen. So this report came into us after hours, though as we discussed, we try to triage any incoming bug as soon as they come in. Our on-call pen tester is able to triage this bug and respond to the researcher in about an hour. This is after hours. We still did it within the hour. Note that I mentioned we responded to the researcher. This is not an automated message. This is our on-call pen tester confirming that we had received the bug, that it was a working bug, and that we were working towards an immediate fix. Now, the next question I usually get, or Corey gets, is, hey, what makes this one a critical? Now, being able to change anybody's profile picture to anything you want across the entire platform is pretty straightforward critical. But some of the bugs that we get in aren't so clear. What we found works amazingly well is a defined table of bugs, related severity, part of the site, and service level agreement for resolution, which would be SLA. So this also gives our pen testers some great guidance for being able to triage and quickly handle the bugs, but it also gives our teams who we're working with clear guidance and shows them that this is the way we're moving forward. Now, after triaging, which we handle, the focus immediately shifts to alerting our ecosystem team, which I said I'm a part of. And the idea here is to alert us to then start coordinating a fix with a responsible team. While we as a security team are there to help them identify the root cause of the issue and work towards a fix and remediation, we ask that the appropriate team take the responsibility for designing the fix and pushing it to production. Now, the great thing about being an online company, as Corey mentioned earlier, is we have the ability to push code very quickly. As Corey mentioned just a minute ago, some of our teams actually do it 3 by 3, 3 times a day. So, pretty darn fast. Most of the time when we identify a critical issue, we can push out fixes within a matter of hours. Though, in this particular case with the changing faces, we realized the potential impact that could be happening. The YouTube video already posted, so we had to break member functionality by installing, or rather inserting, an upstream filter, which broke member functionality. So we took away the blocker report piece. However, it was definitely the right call to protect our members and protect the site. So the thing to note here is that within a few hours after working with the responsible team, we were actually able to launch a hotfix into production, remove that block filter, and go ahead and restore the member functionality. It's a pretty cool one. So I think you guys can see this is my profile, though I hope you can see that this is not my profile picture. I think my profile changed at least a dozen times that evening as my oh-so-funny colleagues tested out this new feature globally. And I think this is the one it ended on by the time we had a hot fix, so yeah. So now the cleanup seems like the next logical step, right? Of course. But have we determined the scope of the impact of the problem? How many members were affected? And also pretty darn important, has anyone been abusing this flaw? Now, if you wait until the incident is almost over before you start asking these questions, inevitably you're going to delay closing out your incident and you're not getting any sleep. Ideally, this data is being sifted through in parallel to the fix being built. Now, your application security team will need access to member data, state changes, log data. All these types of things will be a combination, if you're lucky, of things like Elasticsearch, Hadoop, HDFS, and other structured queryable entities. Now, I'm very lucky. At LinkedIn, we have a dedicated security data science team who I can call and ask for this types of information. However, it's actually not necessary and can be done by members of your own team with access to this information. Like the spare tire on your car, though, if you wait to check it until you're on the side of the road on a dark and stormy night, inevitably you will find it flat or missing. Don't wait until you're in the midst of an incident to find out that you don't have proper logs, or the IP address of your attacker that's being captured is that of your own CDN. Yeah. So let's take another case study here, which I think will provide some really cool background. Now, this report came to us via our private bug bounty program, via our SlideShare product, which is a company we acquired and is a LinkedIn company. This researcher had been in our private bug bounty program, which we'll talk about a little bit later, for about a total of an hour. What the researcher discovered was that he could add any YouTube video to anybody's SlideShare just by enumerating a video ID. Pretty scary. So following the path that the researcher had laid out for us, our on-call pen tester started going through and enumerating and figuring out other vulnerabilities. What we found, not only could you add videos, you could delete videos for anybody's SlideShare presentation. So basically, you could swap out anybody's videos across all members across the entire place. Pretty scary. So, as I highlighted earlier, this is a great reason to have a seasoned pen tester actually triaging your incoming bugs. The idea here is pretty simple. If we had missed this, we would have missed a completely other bug. By having the seasoned pen tester who knows to play around with this stuff and go through it, he found this additional bug that we were able to fix. Now, this is a pretty straightforward critical. It's pretty easy to imagine how this is a critical. It doesn't require a lengthy discussion with the teams who are responsible for fixing it. Now, some of the cases aren't so clear. And during the last case study, we focused on remediation, cleanup with the or communication with the researcher, cleanup. Some of the pieces we didn't cover were the internal communication processes, why we chose to implement a bug classification table, and of course, stopgap solutions. So, Any reasonable engineer, designer, pen tester, salesperson will understand the impact of uploading or deleting YouTube videos to anybody else's SlideShare presentation. Pretty easy to explain how this is a critical and does not require a lengthy discussion. However, we as security professionals often get labeled as grumpy, argumentative, or my favorite, just a plain old jerk. And the reason why we get labeled these things, including a jerk, is because we find ourselves trying to convince other people within our own organizations why something is important, scary, or dangerous and has to be fixed right now. These conversations typically devolve into the other person arguing things like impact, complexity, accessibility, exploitability, and my absolute favorite, still of all time, it's existed like this for years, so why do we have to fix it now? Right? We've all heard that one. So what we found helps negate some of these conversations and such is the bug classification table. While we should encourage the healthy discussions and debates, the focus has to maintain on mitigating the threat right now. So, as I said, we came up with the bug classification table. This is an example of it behind me. We implemented a clear and concise, easy to understand bug severity table negates these conversations. A stored cross-site scripting in production is a critical and requires immediate fixing, no questions asked. Now, the security industry would argue that we should be using a CVSS approach for scoring these. However, we found that it just leads to our engineers and developers arguing the things in order to lower their score so they can go back to sleep. So many teams can do the technical work, and we as security professionals are really good at closing the security vulnerabilities. Now, what separates a poorly executed incident versus those that are run smoothly in the eyes of the outsiders to your security org is communication. One of the key roles that our ecosystem team handles is communication and coordination. Basically, think of it this way. Whenever you're working on an issue, there's going to be multiple individuals, if not teams, involved. Our ecosystem team essentially becomes air traffic controllers, gathering that information and distributing it back out. Now, the communication, though, doesn't stop at the teams working on the issue, though. It has to flow upwards to management and, unfortunately, sometimes to your PR and legal teams, which is always fun. Now, the thing here is you want to make sure you provide the management with a clear note. You never want them to find out about a problem or a entry or anything like that via back channels or word of mouth. They will question what you as a security professional are doing. The idea here is to provide them with a very quick summary, give them an explanation of what's going on without going into super technical deep detail, a planned remediation, next steps, and next update. Now, we believe so much in this particular model that for every one of our critical security issues, one of these communications emails goes out. So let's just take a quick look at one of the examples here. As you can see in the example behind me, there's a headline giving an executive summary, followed by a more in-depth explanation, links to the tickets, and so on. Now, there's also a footer in bold at the bottom of that email, if you guys can see it. It's on the right-hand side of that screen. This is done very intentionally. When I first started sending these communication emails out to management, lawyers, and PR, I received a lot of complaints that I was tattletaling or ratting out the teams for making a mistake. The idea here is not to put them under the sights. The idea here is to share information to all impacted parties. So once I started adding this communication to every single one of my critical security emails, as well as pre-briefing the team that these would go out, the complaints, well, at least most of the complaints went away. So, now the other thing to mention here is the tone of the email. And you'll see that it's relatively easy, or relatively neutral. The other thing that I have in here is a thank you line. Again, I want to avoid being labeled as a jerk. During nights, weekends, after hours, your teams are going to be stressed. They're going to be tired. Adding a thank you line up to management that gives them visibility will help keep that team morale pretty darn high. Now, one last note before we move away from this particular case study. With the YouTube video issue, we were able to push the fix into production within a few hours. Thus, only one of these emails went out. Now, with other particular security criticals, you might find that it'll last not only hours, but days, and unfortunately, sometimes weeks. If anyone ever has to ask you for an update, you've waited too long to send one of these out. My personal motto here is beat them to the punch. Now, you don't have to have someone like me to do these, but the next thing to do is simply set the expectation for when the next update will happen. So, in both these case studies, we used a pretty standard playbook. This is not a 100-page book that no one ever reads or updates and just sits on someone's desk. This is a playbook. It's a framework that gives us something that is predictable and consistent and practical. Now, teams who have been assigned security criticals from us know exactly what to expect, and this comes with time and exposure, but it also comes with transparency. We believe so much in this, we've released public versions of these, which is available through the blog, and you'll see a link later. So, I want to go back and touch on one thing, which is collaboration. When forcing an immediate, all-hands-on-deck approach to fixing security-critical issues, there's a certain reality that things just can't change right now for you. Certain teams can't build new functionality, redesign a product, or completely do something overnight. And while we can allow these long-term fixed discussions to happen, which the teams will naturally go to, you as a security professional and consultant need to work collaboratively. Come prepared to offer up some of these countermeasures. We found that many times we can implement an additional control, block a path, or break functionality like I was talking about earlier in order to reduce the severity of the bug. Note that I said we didn't close the bug out completely. We're simply reducing the threat surface here. Now, don't expect, though, that the teams are going to come to these conclusions by themselves. You, as a security professional, have to come ready to offer up some of these countermeasures. So, bug bounty programs. This will be fun. So, I think we can all agree that there are core reasons that companies open up public bug bounty programs. And I think we can agree they want to receive quality reports, establish a good working relationship with the security community, they want to stay out of the negative light or the press, and of course, be a good use of money and resources. In contrary, what these programs have fostered is an influx of false and bad reports of researchers attempting simply to gain a bounty. We've seen the signal-to-noise ratios of these public bug bounty programs continue to grade as we operate them. It's requiring companies to hire dedicated resources, hire consultancies, and use platform vendors to sift through all the junk just to find actionable reports. So before we launch into our specific program and how we got to where we are, I want to share another case study here with you, which I believe will help set the tone. Going back the other year to an intro product that we had launched, it was getting a fair amount of negative attention in the press, even on the security side. During that same period of time, a blog post was brought to our attention explaining how our intro product could be used to social engineer a victim. Now, many companies would start using their large legal arm and try to smash the author of the blog, right? We decided to take a different approach. We reached out to the researcher. We invited him to talk and share what he had found. Unsurprisingly, the researcher was more than willing to work with us. Using the same methodologies that we discussed earlier about solving critical security issues in the same day, we closed that same issue that same day. Unsurprisingly, the researcher's follow-up post was about how awesome we were, how cool we were to work with, and how fast we can deploy code to production. So it was a pretty big, awesome change for us. Now, I'm sharing this case study with you for two reasons. The first is collaboration. This is not and should not be an adversarial relationship between the two parties. It's completely the opposite. The researcher was willing to work with us and share what he had found. Now, this change in attitude on both sides, remember I said both sides here, means that both parties win. Now, due to the other one I wanted to share with you is availability. Due to the fact that we weren't handling hundreds and hundreds of other reports, arguing with researchers on bounties and such, I was able to personally dedicate time to work with this researcher and understand what he had truly found. Now, this change on both sides and the personal touch, communication, and understanding what the researcher truly wants changes the outcome. Now, we believe that every researcher should be treated right, regardless if there's a public bug bounty program in place or not. And this is the spirit of how bug bounty programs should be run, as collaborative. And this is how we run our program. So how did we get to our program? Well, before we launched, we received a number of reports to our security alias, security@linkedin.com, and most of those were complete junk. However, a smaller group of researchers emerged who were actually a pleasure to work with, provided actionable write-ups, and were willing to collaborate and work with us. So we said, hey, we like working with these people. We know our product. We know some of the problems. Why not put these people into a program that rewards them for doing their work moving forward? And that's the spirit of how the original bug bounty program started. And I believe this is how we bring it back to its original intent. The advantage of making it private allows us to have a more meaningful relationship with the researchers by eliminating the distractions of poorly researched or irrelevant reports. Providing the response and analysis to these researchers, if you want to do it properly and promptly, takes a fair amount of time if you want to do this correct. So we did it in October. Actually, in 2015, we formally announced at Black Hat USA the formalization partnership of the creation of LinkedIn's private bug bounty program, or invite only. The participants are invite only and have reported over 100 actionable bugs to us in that time frame, and we've successfully implemented fixes for each. Now, in exchange for all their hard work and such, we've paid out over $85,000 in bounties. They've been great and not only helping out with new stuff that hits the market, they've been also great at identifying bugs in older code that didn't go through the same levels of security diligence that Corey was talking about earlier. Now, we've been also able to give out bonus awards for certain types of research that show creativity or persistence due to the availability to reduce noise. Now, the other advantage of a private program or invite-only program is the lack of gamesmanship that is typically present with public bug bounty programs, where you typically end up paying for a bug that is somehow really not meaningful at all, impacts your business or members, but still slipped in within the rules. Our private researchers in the program typically don't go down this path. They're much more interested in finding actionable bugs for us and our members. See, the problem with public bug bounty programs is they don't incentivize in-depth or thoughtful analysis. As a researcher in one of these programs, you're basically racing against the clock. There's more likely than not someone else out there working on the same bug as you. So why do you want to do an in-depth or thoughtful analysis to start chaining together bugs? The idea here is you want to stake your claim as soon as possible. And it doesn't have to be anything more than a screenshot and a cool-sounding title. And we all know, we've seen plenty of bug reports like that. The thing is, these public bug bounty programs do not incentivize this in-depth or thoughtful analysis. Now, the other part here is they really do encourage that quick, poorly written submissions of researchers, again, attempting to gain a bounty. With our program, our researchers know that the competition is limited, and if they invest the time into their investigations and reports, most likely there will be a reward. So we've spoken about our program and its advantages, but let's talk about impact here for a second. I can spout off really cool ratios that we have a signal-to-noise ratio of 7:3, while the industry average is hovering somewhere in around a 1:20. However, unless you're involved in a program yourself, run it, or such, I probably just sound like I'm spouting off random numbers. Very simply put, a 1:20 ratio means for every one good bug you get 20 bad bugs. Pretty easy, okay? Now, the problem that many companies don't understand with these signal-to-noise ratios is the impact this will have on their business. Every one of the reports, regardless if you think it is junk or not, has to be reviewed. Because what if you think it is a junk report, but it ends up being a real one? I guarantee you in 90 days, the researcher would be more than happy to take you to the press, and the headline's going to read, "Company ignores security researcher, 0-day dropped." Okay? So now we can all agree that every single report, regardless if we think it's junk or not, has to be reviewed. Now, if you want to do this properly and triage every incoming bug and communicate back with the researcher, which you should because we treat our researchers right, you can easily see on average this could take about an hour per report. Now, without doing any math, it's pretty easy to see that the workload has significantly increased. And if you don't have the pre-made template for responses, SLAs in place with your engineering and dev teams, all your ticketing systems and everything else, and a bug severity table to help guide these conversations and flows, this is going to get out of control very quickly. Now, check out the latest research from both BugCrowd and HackerOne. They agree. The signal-to-noise ratio is constantly degrading in these public bug bounty programs. The days of launching a public bug bounty program just because everyone else is doing it and it's cool is over. This is a complex endeavor that we all must prepare for. Our suggestion here is start small with a group of researchers you actually trust. At the end of the day, what really matters is protecting our members, employees, and products. We know while we can assemble an amazing team that will help reduce this threat, we will always need help from the outside. Our strategy is not to throw out bug bounty programs completely. It's rather to better connect with the researchers who will help us achieve the goal of securing our data. Back to you, Corey.
So we wanted to give you just a key set of takeaways from our talk today. And the first is that we want you to consider your security program tactically, and especially your application security program where things are moving very, very quickly, and keeping up is the most important thing. And try to consider your assessment program as a consultancy where you're providing subject matter expertise and demonstrating signs of operational excellence about how you execute that, just as you would as a professional services firm. And as David has indicated, one of the most important things to think about getting right is your application incident response process. And that includes how you prioritize and triage bugs, as well as how you try to result in getting the best outcome as quickly as possible. And then finally, before considering bug bounties as the end-all and be-all to getting good bugs, first focus on treating external vulnerability researchers right. And then from there, consider a private bug bounty program. Our slides are available at the URL below. You can get a copy of our sample bug classification table, our management email reporting, as well as the slides, and some other supplemental information that we'd like to share. And so with that, I believe we have a few minutes for questions, if anyone has any.
We got a guy over here.
Yeah. Go ahead.
Do you maintain any test bed system to check whether or not the bug report is due or not?
So the question was, do we have any test bed system to determine whether or not the bug was valid or not? We do not at this time. There are some places that and other bug bounty programs, especially ones that have public bug bounty programs, where they will be able to submit test vectors directly to and get a positive or negative sign, but we don't.
So my second question is, how often do you organize internal security awareness training for engineers in terms of
Oh, great question. So the second question was regarding how do we have internal training and awareness for developers as part of the system. So we have N days at LinkedIn, and those are 1 day a month that is focused on a given topic. So that can ever be from community engagement to learning to having fun, and one of those every year is on security and privacy. And so that's a day where we'll give talks like this to the company as a whole. We'll give case studies and member stories about how security impacts our members. We also have a program that we call our Security Champions program, where we engage people in different parts of the engineering, product, and operations team to act as security champions. And that includes a defined 6-month tour of duty, where the first quarter they spend in getting education and training. We sign them up for a cybersecurity training certificate from Stanford University, where they get a good amount of background on the principles of application security. And then the second quarter, they help us do almost as an extension of the security team, where they bring in security awareness to their teams, as well as help us smash bugs and work on architectural problems that needs a particular security attention from their perspective. So, yeah. I think they're coming around with a mic.
Do you have this more strategic kind of approach in, application security or doing the security development, something like a Microsoft SDL? And my second question is, what kind of platforms, the language or OS that you use, and what are the issues that you see in those platforms? Yeah.
Sure. So we do not have like a formal, like certified stamped type SDL at LinkedIn. We do Agile as a general rule, and from that, what we try to do is we have our larger projects will be defined a little closer to a waterfall style with kind of Agile thrown in. And then to answer the question about our technology, LinkedIn is a production environment. We own our own data centers. We use Java and Linux as our base operating system. We are a big adopters of the Play framework. Is the majority of what LinkedIn is built on today. And the Play framework is a standard MVC type of framework, so you're going to encounter a lot of those same issues that you might see in things like Rails or Spring or other things as well. So, yep.
Hi, Corey, David. Thanks. This has been helpful. Couple of elements that I would like to understand better. Do you have a process to ensure traceability across the DevOps lifecycle? something that I did not see in this presentation. And second is, as opposed to code reviews and pen test, what is the emphasis on your unit test, system integration test, and user acceptance test in that life cycle, and whether pen tests are ever conducted in a UAT environment as well?
Right. So first on the visibility in DevOps. So there's people having visibility into the security process and us having visibility into what's going on in DevOps. So to answer the question about like what do we see from the DevOps perspective, LinkedIn uses what we call a ramps process. We do a lot of A/B testing. So you'll find that a lot of things, features that we launch will go to a very small percentage of the population, maybe even the company first, and then 1%, 5%, and 10%, up to 100% ramps for given features. Each of those ramps has a ticket in Jira that's mapped to a feature set and code path. And so our team, and particularly David as part of the ecosystem team, will actually monitor those ramps. And once they reach company, for example, then we'll make sure that the necessary security diligence has been performed before they can move on to a 1% ramp to the rest of the organization. So that gives us visibility into everything that's going on, as long as it's something large enough to be a ramp. As far as visibility into what we're doing from the security perspective, all those numbers that we do, about, like, for example, the number of assessments that we perform, the types of vulnerabilities that we find and where we find them, we release a ton of metrics to the rest of our organization so they have a really good visibility about the types of things that we're doing and the types of bugs we're finding and where we're finding them in. To answer your question about testing in UAT or staging or the like, absolutely. So when we're looking at applications that are significantly complex and we're looking at them before launch, we do test in EI. We also have the concept of canarying at LinkedIn, so we'll have just simply one server that has the new code, and we'll test there. We also do automation and testing for certain types of things. For example, we have a templating language called Dust, which we want to make sure that engineers are not overwriting the fail-safe defaults for things like cross-site scripting vectors. So we have scripts that will look as a pre-commit hook into those to make sure that people are not marking things that could be tainted as safe, for example. So we do some of that through automation as well.
Thanks.
Hey, I have a question. How big is your team? As you said, you complete 250 plus assessment, right, pen test?
So our assessment team has 6 people and the supporting ecosystem team.
So based on 6 people, every person would be doing 50 plus assessment every year? Means a week for one pen test, right? Must be very busy. Correct.
Yes. They're very busy.
I think we're out of time.
Great.
Cool.
Well, thank you all.
Thank you all. And if you get the survey, please fill it out. Thank you so much.